it the war on dissent, or rather, the war on terrorism? Well, that's what many folks are asking, especially after the FBI raided the homes of several anti-war activists and leaders in Minneapolis, Chicago, and possibly other cities in the Midwest. Now, members of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force apparently seized personal photos, computers, and cell phones, also serving federal grand jury subpoenas on several activists. Well, former Ronald Reagan official and columnist Paul Craig Roberts joins me now from Georgia. Good to see you there, Dr. Roberts. So the FBI on Friday searched 8 addresses in Minneapolis and Chicago, including the home of the executive director of the Arab American Action Network. Apparently the feds were looking for connections between local anti-war activists and groups in Colombia and the Middle East. But, you know, some people aren't buying that justification. I want you to talk a little bit more about the way that the FBI is painting this search. What do you think is really going on here?
Well, the anti-war protesters themselves have said that this is an attempt to intimidate them so that they cease organizing more anti-war demonstrations. I think it's much more serious even than that. And what the United States government is doing is establishing in the public's mind that anyone who criticizes the so-called war on terror is giving material aid to terrorism. You see, we don't have a war against Iraq or war against Afghanistan. We have a war against terror. And under the rubric of terror, the government has stripped us of our civil liberties. And so what they're doing now is to create the impression and get public acceptance of the idea that people who protest the war against terror are aligned with terrorists. And the definition of material support is one of those very vague police state terms that can be interpreted however the government wants.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because, you know, the FBI has declined to give details on these searches, saying that the agency was investigating criminal activities not protected by the First Amendment. But you mentioned these terms, you know, terms like violent extremism and material support. It seems like they're very broadly defined. They're kind of vague. So where do you draw that line between folks who are advocating for peace, those who are opposed to wars, and those that actually do provide material support for terrorist organizations abroad? There's a very delicate balance here.
Well, I think the government is not interested in any balance. What they're establishing is that if you criticize what we're doing, you're against us. Remember Bush's declaration, you're for us or you're against us? And now this is being brought home to the American people, so that if you criticize the government, not just the war on terror, for example, I think the real target of the Homeland Security and the FBI are the 9/11 truthers, because the people who are challenging the government's account of 9/11, they're the ones who are really dangerous to the government, and they keep producing more and more evidence that the government's account is fraudulent. And I think that the government is starting with the anti-war protesters because a lot of Americans still resent the anti-war protesters of the Vietnam era. And they still think that they lost the Vietnam War because of the anti-war protesters. So the people will accept the government cracking down on anti-war protesters. But the next step will be other groups of dissent against government policies.
And, of course, those protesters are saying, look, we're just practicing our constitutional rights. But here's the thing. This is not the first time that we're hearing of cases, of stories like this. And you have said, you've written actually, that the most concerning thing of all here is that these cases set up a dangerous precedent. That next time, the raids or even the punishment might be harsher. I just want you to elaborate a little bit more on that point.
Well, that's exactly what the government's doing. That's what it's setting up. It's going about it step by step. This is just the opening note. You see, look, first of all, the warrants that the judge issued for the raid on the anti-war protesters are illegal because the FBI did not produce any evidence that there was criminal activities on the part of these people. So it was a fishing expedition warrant. These are not the kind of warrants that are permissible under the American Constitution. And what the government is doing, what the government is declaring, is that you do not have any constitutional rights when it comes to questioning what we are doing in the name of the war on terror. That whatever we do in the war on terror is our right as government, and if you question it, then it means you're on the side of the terrorist. That is the paradigm, the legal paradigm that is being created. And so it won't just be anti-war protest organizers. It will be anyone who criticizes any aspect, and I think they will use this eventually to shut down legal groups like the American Civil Liberties Union, because they will say, well, look at you. You're defending people who are giving material aid to terrorism. You are yourself giving material aid to terrorism, and so they're going to shut down all forms of legal protection of our civil liberties and constitutional rights. That's what is afoot.
It's definitely a precarious situation. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, always an interesting conversation. Thanks.